And as I say, by profession, he was an engraver. He was also a poet. He's famous as a poet, but his engravings are no less famous. You can see them to this day, and it's unusual amongst the great poets, at any rate, that they master more than one art, but Blake arguably did. And he puts these colored graphics in his own books. Now, the poems we're going to look at, based on everything I've just said thus far about nature being fundamentally good, we're born in innocence. By the way, this is what you'll hear our media, who's also fundamentally romantic in their sensibilities, anti-Christian in their theology, anti-Christian in their view of human nature, in the sense that they deny original sin. They will always be outraged when somebody shoots somebody, or when some atrocity happens. They'll be outraged. Why are they outraged? Because they think it ought not to happen. I happen to agree. It ought not to happen. However, what they mean by that is that we could do something to prevent this from happening by addressing the root causes once again. Because after all, we're fundamentally good. What led the shooter to go shoot people? Well, he had access to guns. That's not the root cause either, actually, but that would be the solution. We'll just take away all the guns. That's not going to solve the problem of somebody killing other people. It might solve the scale to some degree, but you could go out and do it with a knife or a club or a machete, as some do, right? Or a vehicle. You can just drive your car through a crowd of people and mow them down. Mass murder through that means. But they will see that there are two polarities in human life. There's one of innocence, where your nature is just basically fundamentally good. And then there's the thing that arises out of that, which we call experience. Those, as Blake says, and I'm not sure if you can see what he writes as the sort of the subtitle here, showing the two contrary states of the human soul. And they're contrary. They're not just two different. They are opposed to one another. Innocence is the state in which we're born, reflected in the lives of children, usually. The landscape, I talked about the way in which romantic poetry changed the notion of heroism and landscape and so forth. So the landscape for romantic poetry is almost always rural. And in that sense, it shares much in common with the ancient world, where heroes are in that rustic setting as well, at least sometimes, although not in the actual epics, where their rural landscape is totally irrelevant. But it will be a farmer or a rustic, somebody who lives in the presence of nature, who will be the hero. Somebody who has a cottage by a lake. By the way, this is the beginning of the movement to regard nature as something that needs to be preserved and protected from human habitation at all. The beginning of the idea of the green belt or the national park. The first national park is in England, in the northwest, in the area that they now call the Lake District. You're not allowed to build homes in that area. There's some that exist in the villages. They can stay there, but you are not allowed to build a big industrial park there, because we want to preserve the sanctity of nature, its sublime beauty, etc. And then there's experience. Now, Blake is using those, and we'll see that he writes poems about the same subject from the two contrary viewpoints. But they are contrary. Nature is at war with experience, in a sense, and experience is at war with nature. The way in which that is expressed differs from poem to poem. Let's look at the beginning of this. Let's go to the introduction. And you'll see something about what I said already about the hero and the themes. Piping down the valleys wild, piping songs of pleasant glee, on a cloud I saw a child, and he laughing said to me, Pipe a song about a lamb. So I piped with merry cheer. Piper, pipe that song again. So I piped. He wept to hear. Drop thy pipe, thy happy pipe. Sing thy songs of happy cheer. So I sung the same again, while he wept with joy to hear. Piper, sit thee down and write in a book that all may read. So he vanished from my sight, and I plucked a hollow reed, and I made a rural pen, and I stained the water clear, and I wrote my happy songs, every child may joy to hear. This is the introduction to the Songs of Innocence. What do you notice about the poem? What do you notice? Anything that immediately strikes you? I'll note things that you didn't note. Don't worry, I've read it many times. But yes. Okay, the child, as I said, yes, the child, and yep.
Stylistically, it's in rhyming couplets.
Is in rhyme, yeah, not rhyming couplets, but it's alternating rhyme, right? Wild glee, child me, right? But the rhyme is there. Yes. Happiness, cheerfulness. Well, in the Songs of Innocence, yes. And simplicity. Any long, difficult words here? No, very simple, childish vocabulary. So the hero, a child, the setting, rural, the rhyme, more or less along the like what children love to hear. And the protagonists in it, if you will, not just the child, but singing about a lamb, singing to a who? A piper, somebody playing music. Okay. I'm not going to I could spend a long time on this poem, but I don't want to take too much time on it. Note what happens here. There is a progression between the 5 stanzas. He sees a child on a cloud. Odd thing that's children on clouds. They're not on clouds to begin with. So there's a sort of sense that the child here represents one of those what do they call them? Putti. The fat little babies in Renaissance paintings that are cherub. Yeah, but a cherub is an angel. But in here, the cherubs are always fat babies with like that sort of thing. So it's an idyllic representation of childhood. And the child tells the piper to pipe about a lamb. Now the lamb's capitalized, and anyone who has a Christian background will immediately associate a lamb with not a lamb, small l lamb, but the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world, who loves children. Right? Let the little children come unto me. Right? Don't keep them away. Let them come to me. A sense that they're in there as well. But pipe, and the repetitiveness as well. Piping, pipe, piped, pipe, over and over and over. Repetitive, strongly repetitive, doesn't matter. Just like the rhyme scheme, so the language. Strongly repetitive. Do children repeat themselves when they talk at a small age, at a young age? All the time. So it's mimicking to some sense not only the vocabulary of a child, but even the speech patterns. And it's excitable. The excitement of the child is expressed. Are children excitable? Oh, yes, they are. Natural vitality. Part of their goodness. But it progresses. Piping, pipe about a lamb, he does it, and the child weeps in response to the song. How come weeping? Well, it's because of the extreme joy. If you laugh so hard that tears fall, then you're really laughing, because there's a sort of a threshold between laughter and tears that's actually quite close. It also works the other day when you're really, really upset. You can finally find yourself break into laughter, uncontrollable laughter. It just one moves to the other. But here he sings and he weeps, and there's a sense here latent and subtle, but still here, of a fall already happening. It's not full, but it's there. The joy is giving way to tears. This will be exacerbated in the fourth line, where we move to the piper not only singing, but now writing. And when he writes, he's now doing what? Now, if you take what I said earlier about the evolution of language, going from an oral period of spontaneous emotional expression, grunts and cries, to articulate sounds, words, and from an oral culture then to a written culture, then you're seeing a greater sophistication, socialization. As soon as you write things down, you're no longer memorizing it, hearing what somebody said a tale and remembering it and telling it yourself. You are reading it in a book. It's a detached way. And it takes place with a violation of nature. What does he do? He plucks a reed. And at that point, the child vanishes from his sight. The child's gone. As soon as you write, as soon as you meditate, because to write you have to reflect. To speak you don't. We demonstrate that all the time. People speak without thinking constantly. I wish I hadn't said that. When you write, it's slower and it's more detached and it's more deliberate. It's more rational. So the child vanishes at the very point. It's actually the child that asks for it, but still, when he does this, the child vanishes at that point. What else happens? He makes a rural pen and he stains the water clear. So the violation of nature has begun. The water is no longer clear and clean. And I wrote my happy songs every child may joy to hear. So there's something very subtle about it. It's not suggesting this terrible atrocity has happened. It's a subtle fall that is even there in the introduction of the Songs of Innocence. But it represents thematically everything I just said about the view of anthropology of early human beings being good and emotional communities and giving way to a poetic culture first, and theological culture, and then to a philosophical culture, and then finally to a scientific culture. Right? We'll look at this from Songs of Experience now. I'm just going to go back and forth in companion poems. And just note the difference in the tone. This is the introduction, just like before. Hear the voice of the bard. A bard is a poet. Hear the voice of the bard, who present, past, and future sees, whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees, calling the lapsed soul and weeping in the evening dew, that might control the starry pole and fallen light renew. O earth, return, arise from out the dewy grass. Night is worn, and the morn rises from the slumberous mass. Turn away no more. Why wilt thou turn away? The starry floor, the watery shore, is given thee till the break of day. Much more strongly theologically freighted, the language. Suggests is not only creation, but a sense of fall. Not only a sense of fall, but a need for redemption. The fall has happened. This is the Song of Experience. Reference is explicitly now theological. If you thought when I said the lamb, it's capitalized, you're stretching a bit there, Masson. The companion poem suggests maybe not so much. Because again, a direct reference to the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, well, that's the Holy Word. The Creator is the Redeemer. But now it's not from the perspective of creation, nature, but rather from the perspective of a fallen world in need of redemption. And he walks among the ancient trees, the trees of Mamre, where in Genesis 17, where the three visitors come to Abraham, perhaps. And not only walking there, but calling what? The lapsed soul. And weeping. The weeping there was preceded by joy in the first poem. Here there's no joy. It's just weeping. Lamenting. Knowing a loss of innocence. Calling it to return. And for a renewal of the light that has vanished. 4 stanzas this time. A little bit more sophisticated in its language, and its theology is more explicit. A little harder as a poem. You could get a child to read the Song of Innocence and there would be no problem with it, I think. You could read, if you read the same poem, you'd find that this would be too difficult for a child of a certain age. A little bit, they'd have to be older. I think they'd still get it because the language is not difficult either. But more is going. So a need for redemption. So one, creation, the other, redemption. So again, innocence experience. But now, not in terms of Christian theology, but in terms of the natural theology of Romanticism, where nature is good and society is evil and experience evil as well. By the way, you can't avoid, oh, thank you. You cannot avoid the evil of experience. It comes with age. There's no way of avoiding the fall. Even if you didn't live in a city and lived in the natural world, you would still grow in experience and you would still fall. So for the Romantics, and Blake in particular, and all the Romantic poets are the same on this, by the way, they all know that you cannot simply avoid the fall. It comes. In fact, we chase it. We want to grow up. We want to be like the adults. This greatly troubles Wordsworth. Why do you, child, want to become like those freighted with the cares of life and weighed down by it? Why do you want to do this? But it happens, and they just simply note it that it does. What's the means of recovery then? It's that word I used earlier, the imagination. Through the imagination, you can recover the lost innocence and emphasize the goodness of nature and think about it. Whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is lovely, whatever is natural, think about these things and reflect on it and use it as the center of your life. Idolize your central goodness, your primal goodness. Idolize that. Make it your narrative about yourself, how you were such a good person, but you suffered such wrong. And it wasn't fair. But rather than being angry about it, uphold the goodness. It's the most potent threat, I think, to the Christian faith. Not the atheism of the Enlightenment, but the antidote, which is no antidote at all. It is an alternative. The theology that arises out of it, by the way, is called panentheism, which is God is in everything and everyone. It's expressed in all of our culture, pop culture all the time. You and I are gods. We just have to recognize the God in everybody and everything's going to be good. The discipline of psychology is there to more or less help you self-author yourself. Does that sound familiar? It's Jordan Peterson's self-authoring software. You can help be your own author. It's romantic sensibilities. It is the fundamental approach of psychology. Let's look at this one. This is interesting. It's called The Little Black Boy. And it gives us a little bit of a different context. Now, as I say, when is this written? Late 18th century, early 19th century. What's going on politically? I mentioned the French Revolution. What else is going on? The African slave trade and the abolitionist movement in Britain, led by who? William Wilberforce, among others, and the Clapham sect, amongst whom are many Methodists and nonconformist Christians. When I say nonconformist, they're not Anglicans. And they are objecting to the fact that the establishment is trading on human souls and treating people as commodities. Blake is obviously on the side, I shouldn't say obviously, Blake is on the side of Wilberforce and company. Note how they have a common cause, but they don't come from the same point of view, per se. But let's look at the account here. This is the little black boy. This is from the Songs of Innocence. We'll look at his experience in a minute. My mother bore me in the southern wild, and I am black. But oh, my soul is white. White as an angel is the English child, but I am black, as if bereaved of light. My mother taught me underneath a tree, and sitting down before the heat of day, she took me on her lap and kissed me, and pointing to the east, began to say, look on the rising sun. There God does live, and gives his light, and gives his heat away, and flowers and trees and beasts and men receive comfort in morning, joy in the noonday. And we are put on earth a little space, that we may learn to bear the beams of love. And these black bodies and this sunburnt face are but a cloud, and like a shady grove. For when our souls have learned the heat to bear, the cloud will vanish. We shall hear his voice, saying, come out from the grove, my love and care, and round my golden tent, like lambs rejoice. Thus did my mother say, and kissed me. And thus I say to little English boy, when I from black and he from white cloud free, and round the tent of God like lambs we joy, I'll shade him from the heat till he can bear to lean in joy upon our Father's knee. And then I'll stand and stroke his silver hair and be like him, and he will then love me. How do you like the poem? Not all the Songs of Innocence are the same. In fact, some of them are quite significantly different from each other. This is a little story within a poem, and a sophisticated one at that. It's a little bit of a folksy one. It deals with racism, as we would call it now. And with a common human nature. And it's the common human nature that's appealed to, or the common nature. And the differences between the nature is simply that one is more remote from the sun than the other. But again, it's appealing to a certain nature, and the brightness and heat of the sun in Africa is what accounts for the darkness of the one child's skin and the whiteness of the other child's skin, respectively. The angels are portrayed as white. And the children here, now this is obviously a black child who is living in England, who's been brought to Britain. Because he was born in the southern wild, but now is no longer there. And when he was there, and by the way, the mother is not in the scene, the mother does not speak, the mother told him a story, the wise mother gave him a little sort of a myth or a tale about his skin color. And what is the myth? The myth is that God is the sun that rises from the east. And that's where he lives. He lives to the east. And he gives us light and he gives us heat, and with the light and heat he gives us warmth and he gives us everything good. And the reason why we live is to bear the beams of love. And the purpose of this is to make our souls. So our souls are being produced through experience. So in the first one, experience is a sort of a fall. Here, experience is a sort of a blessing. Right? As you get older, you bear the beams of love more adequately, and then when your days are done, and the black child with the dark cloud and the white child with the white cloud stand before God, and the black child stands closer to God because the black child's skin is darker and more capable to resist the beams of the sun. And he will shield the white child and treat the white child well until he's able to bear the beams of love. So it's suggesting the superiority of the black child to the white child, and furthermore the injustice of treating the black child with oppression just because it's a social mark of difference. So it's addressing what? Convention, artificial conventions, unnatural conventions. It's a way of juxtaposing nature to culture or convention once again, and pointing out the injustice or of inequitable treatment. And again, he's not talking about the slave trade here, but it's in the backdrop of the poem. Everybody knows the slave trade is happening, or those who are willing to hear about it, and Wilberforce and company are going to make sure that they do. And so, what do you think of the poem? I think it's a powerful, powerful poem myself. But again, the counters are nature and culture. Let me come to its companion poem. Little Black Boy. Where is this? Do we even have a little black boy here? I don't think we do, actually. We don't. It stands on its own. I'll just leave it at that. Let's do the chimney sweeper. Or actually, I've got to do the lamb and the tiger. I'll do this extremely quickly, but this is among his most famous poems. So, and again, lamb, tiger. So associations of lambs, associations of tiger. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly, bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. He has a commonality with the little lamb. God himself called himself a lamb, the Lamb of God. He also became a child. He was incarnated. The natural human linkage is made here, and no distinction per se between nature, animals, and human beings. Appealing to the logic of Scripture without distinction. Right? Now, we saw in Swift, in his modest proposal, that the conflation of the animal world with the human world justified sacrificing children or babies for the sake of food, just like we slaughter cattle and eat them. Here he turns it around the other way and says, actually, what we're going to do is simply to treat the animal world as our kin. After all, did God not call himself a lamb? Again, appealing to the same logic of the goodness of nature. All nature now, without distinction between the animal world and the human world, which again we carry through to the present day. It's behind the whole vegan movement and vegetarianism, etc. Many of the Romantics were vegetarians. I'm not wading into that and so forth. I just note it's a connected feature. What's the companion poem? This is the more famous one. It's called The Tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? Very different than the portrait of experience thus far, presenting God in some sense in his softness and compassion and his fierceness, in his holiness even. Reference to here in the penultimate stanza to the rebel angels. The stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their fears, the war in heaven. By the way, all the Romantics loved Milton, strongly influenced by Milton, and took Milton and spat out the Christian theology, pretty much. As non-essential, the product of an age that was theological, scientific, civilized, and thus obsolete and redundant. We can now move towards a feeling of emotion, of imagination, without those vestiges of civilization which simply oppress the human heart. Their song is of the human heart, without the oppressions of theology or science or culture or authority. But the sublimity of tiger, as opposed to the beauty and the innocence of the lamb. Let's look at the chimney sweeper 2 times. I'd love to do all these poems actually, but I'm not going to have time to do it. It's called The Chimney Sweeper. Here's the one from the Song of Innocence. And here Blake demonstrates his ability to do what Jonathan Swift did, namely to satirize. Blake is a great satirist. Chimney sweepers, by the way, you've seen them in, what's it called? What's the famous movie? Mary Poppins, where they put this. And the chimneys are vast, big things that you can actually go down into them. That's how broad they are. So Santa Claus might be able to fit down them. I'm not quite sure that somebody so fat could possibly go down. Maybe Scrooge, or maybe the Grinch rather. But not an adult person actually. But a child could, and the children were sent down the chimneys to clean them, because what happened is that the soot from the fire of coal would accumulate inside the chimney, and so it would block the chimney, and you'd get chimney fires that would burn the whole house down. So you actually had to clean them from the inside, and they sent small children down to do this. Now, the small children were often orphans who were used by or employed to do this task. Now, the unfortunate part of this for the children was that they would die very young from inhaling the carbon from the chimneys that they were sweeping. They also tend to shave their heads, because their heads would get so thick with soot that they couldn't get the blackness out of their hair. So they would just shave their heads. You didn't get that in Mary Poppins. It doesn't seem quite so barbaric. The practice was much criticized in the Victorian era, but that's 50 years after this. But how else do you stop a chimney fire? Somebody has to go down there. But who is going down there? The poor, the innocent, and they're going to sacrifice their lives to allow the chimney fires of the rich and wealthy who own the homes to burn so that the fire doesn't destroy their houses. That's the backdrop. So Blake is interested in social welfare. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me, while yet my tongue could scarcely cry. Weep, 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 weep. He's trying to say sweep. Can't say it. And he says weep, 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 weep. All the associations with it. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head that curled like a lamb's back was shaved. So I said, hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet. And that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffin and set them all free. Then down a great plain, leaping, laughing, they run and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Then, naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So, if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. This is a very subtle poem. There's the pictures, there's the little white boys, there's God. What is he satirizing? Who's the aim of the satire? Who's the attack? Sure.
He's trying to make it look like this is a good thing and
It's okay.
but it's not.
But God's going to bless you if you're a good boy. So what's he satirizing? He's satirizing the rich. He's satirizing the religion that endorses this and doesn't criticizing it. He's satirizing the whole theology of exploitation, more or less. It's implicit. Note that he associates the child with lambs, even the reference to the white curls of the child's hair. I mean, it's not, if you've been in England, not everyone has blonde, curly hair, but let alone white blonde. But still, the association immediately with here's the little lamb. In fact, we call children little lambs sometime. And a little story that's told them to make them feel good about the fact that they're going to die young. And he feels good about it, and he goes about it, and they all carry on. So he's talking about what? The way in which society endorses injustice and makes people happy with it. It oppresses their nature. Right? Song of Experience, same thing. A little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep, in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother? Say, they are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who made up a heaven of our misery. the little chimney sweeper is still the speaker, but now the speaker is bitter because he knows that the religion that his parents are going to praise and profess violates his nature. It is sacrificing him to that, and they don't care. Again, what is being promoted here, aside from the injustice done to the children of chimney sweeping, is society. And more than that, the family. Very strong anti-family, anti-society note to it. Consistent throughout all the Romantics. The Romantics are, by and large, sociopaths. But if you can't solve the problem of society, because everyone grows in experience, what you can do is use society to change society. And thus the politics is used for that very end. And it's used against the culture that is establishment, and then it becomes the establishment. A lot more poems I could cover with Blake, and I would love to do it actually, including one. Let me, if I have to, what do I have? I have 1 minute, so I got 1 minute. Don't go. Don't take me my 1 minute. I have 1 minute, and I'm not going to do the companion poem. I'm going to do London. I talked about the nature, rural, London, the great city of the day. I wander, by the way, Blake lived in London. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow. I mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mine-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. The marriage hearse. A hearse is used for funerals, only for funerals. For a marriage, you might have a car of some sort, but you don't call it a hearse. He's associating marriage with oppression. He's associating the city with capitalism. It's not even called this at this point. Each street is even chartered. Even the water is chartered. Everywhere where the city is, people are being oppressed. The child who comes into the world with her youthful harlot mother is cursing him when he comes into the world with tears. There are tears everywhere. It's a portrait of the city as an inhospitable, anti-human institution. I'll leave you with that pleasant thought.